Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Aisha Subarkash. What was once a covert war is now spilling out into the open. Iran says an Israeli airstrike on its consulate in Syria has killed the top commander of its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and several others. It is the latest in a string of alleged Israeli attacks which have killed dozens in the past week in Syria and Lebanon. But the latest strikes on an Iranian diplomatic outpost has raised fears of a wider regional war breaking out. After the attack on Iran's consulate in Damascus, Israeli embassies will go on high alert worldwide, the country's public broadcaster said. Iranian state media said Monday's strike had killed General Mohammad Reza Zahedi, who was tasked with managing the IRGC's operations in Syria and Lebanon. Iranian-backed groups like Hezbollah have been trading nearly daily fire with Israel since the start of the conflict in Gaza on October 7. More than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed in the fighting. As Israel continues to receive global condemnation for its onslaught on Gaza, at home, tens of thousands of Israelis are protesting against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. Will this be a turning point in the conflict, and how will Iran respond? And now to discuss Israel's latest strikes on Syria and Lebanon. Joining me from London is Chris Doyle. He is the director at the Council for Arab-British Understanding. And from Doha, Tamer Karmout, an assistant professor at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. So, Chris, what do you make of the latest attack on Iran's consulate in Syria? How much of an escalation is that Israel would deliberately target an Iranian diplomatic outpost?
It's not a shock that it's hit an Iranian target in Syria, given that Israel has been doing that for years. It's taken out all sorts of Iranian-linked targets within Syria. But to actually deliberately strike a diplomatic compound, that is different. That is violating, going to the next level of basically ignoring or treating with contempt international law and those conventions. Imagine, if you will, that it had been Iran that had attacked a foreign embassy or consul general in another capital city. There would have been outrage if it had been Russia, for example. So certainly this is an indication from the Israelis that they are prepared to take the fight to the Iranians, that there are less red lines than perhaps we considered before, and they are not too concerned about escalation at the moment. They want to deliver, obviously, a very tough message to Tehran, and they are prepared to even carry out an attack in the middle of Damascus against a diplomatic building, diplomatic premises.
So, Tamer, what's your take on this latest attack?
Aisha, again, I mean, of course, it's linked to the bigger conflict. I mean, from a wider perspective, we have Gaza now. It's entering a very delicate stage with offensive on Rafah. It's yet to take place, sadly, because the Americans and the Israelis are still discussing the operational aspects of it. Israel, sadly, with the U.S., is determined to use the military option or the security option to solve the Palestinian issue, the Palestinian problem. I think it's now they're shifting their focus because if you see the military conduct in the Gaza Strip, it's taking a different now approach, and they're going into more of a tactical surgical operation because Israel has managed to achieve or to impact this wide destruction on the Gaza Strip, and they still have to deal with the Rafah enclave. Now they're shifting their focus to Lebanon because this is, I mean, they don't want this Axis resistance pressure from them. The issue here or the address is Hezbollah. I think now their focus is Hezbollah. They want to create a new rules of engagement on the northern borders by hitting hard on Hezbollah, on the Axis, on Iran, to bring Hezbollah to the table. So Hezbollah and to sign a new arrangement or a new political deal pertaining the northern borders. So this is why they're hitting hard now. And of course, they're playing with fire because you never know how would this end. You know, it's Israel is pushing more. The U.S. is aware of this, of course, maybe supporting it. Now, the big issue, this is, of course, it's a big humiliation for Iran. How would the Iranians respond to this?
Yes.
That's a big question to be seen. We don't know.
That's the question I am just going to ask Chris. So already we know Iran's president, its foreign minister, and Hezbollah officials said there would be a retaliation. So what could the Iranian response be to this specific attack?
Well, it's not clear. They have certain options, but of course, Israel is the more dominant military power. I would imagine that they will probably use Hezbollah to deliver such an attack, some form of strike within Israel that would certainly, send back a message to the Israelis that we cannot be trifled with. But every time this happened, and we've seen this over the last 4 or 5 months in particular, but even before that, you just ratchet up that tension. You basically risk an all-out hot conflict as opposed to a medium-intensity conflict that we've been seeing recently. I mean, because of all the attention on Gaza, I think a lot of the international media have missed out on the near-daily strikes that are taking place across that border. They're very serious. So we've seen these strikes, yes, in Damascus and Aleppo, but we also saw an Hezbollah commander being targeted as well. And we have a situation where I think that the Israeli authorities know they cannot leave the status quo intact on the northern border. On both sides of that border, large numbers, 80 to 100,000 Israelis, for example, have been evacuated from the north. Similarly, in Lebanon, a similar number of Lebanese have been evacuated. So it's unsustainable unless you come to some sort of understandings. And it could well be that, as your guest has said, that the tensions wind down somewhat in Gaza because there isn't a full-scale military operation. Netanyahu, desperate to stay in power, needs another front to be very hot, to create that permanent sense of crisis, because only that sense of crisis will keep him in power, keep him out of prison.
But is this sustainable?
Well, it's cost the Israeli economy a huge amount. There was one figure that suggested it was as much as $60 billion. Yes. So there is a big hit to Israel. There is a huge risk for regional security and tensions, indeed the global ones as well. And we've seen what's happened in the Red Sea. So the more that it escalates, the broader the impact. I think there is a complacency in the international community which is reckless and irresponsible because they have not sought to de-escalate speedily enough and more effectively enough to send both Iran and Israel a very clear message that this needs to be calmed down, because there's no winners in all of this. It's all going to be about a degree of losing. How many lives lost? How many jobs lost? How many people are going to be maimed for life? How many people are going to be displaced, become refugees?
So, Tamar, what do you make of the timing of this attack, as Chris just mentioned, as it comes at a time when Israel is facing an international isolation due to its attack on Gaza and growing protests against the Netanyahu government and the way how he's handling the fallout of from the October 7 attacks?
It's Aisha, the way I see it, I mean, it's not a challenge or an issue for Netanyahu himself, but also for the American administration, because this is an elections year. One key concern would be that Netanyahu could drag the U.S. administration into a war the Americans themselves don't want to. They don't want the regional war. And Netanyahu is very famous of this. He's a master tactician. I mean, he knows how to escape from his problems, to run forward. So by focusing or shifting his focus now on the Northern Front, of course, he's delivering to the promises he made to the Israeli public that the Northern Front must be safe, and the Israeli residents who have moved to the south have to go back into a safer environment in the north. But the thing is again, things are very complicated because everything, again, it goes back to Gaza and to the Axis resistance. When we say Axis resistance, the Axis resistance is committed to exhaust Israel on many fronts, starting from Gaza to Lebanon, then to Yemen, then at some point in Iraq. And that's their strategy. But the thing is, Netanyahu now at this critical stage, under, as you rightfully said, under international pressure, under growing internal pressure, it could be also that him opening a new front in the north, it's a divergent strategy where he wants to run forward, you know, and probably drag the U.S. into something bigger. The Americans themselves, they don't want to be dragged into. But again, the issue is the American conduct or behavior in this war is still very complicit. Because while the Americans are voicing their concerns on many fronts and on the media and asking Israel to restrain its behavior in Gaza, etc., they're still providing Israel with massive arms, including tactical weapons that could help Israel in launching a new war in the north, in Lebanon, like, you know, the latest shipment of sophisticated, huge bombs that could be used precisely in Lebanon, for Lebanon. So it's really it's a delicate situation.
So, Chris, Muslim countries including Iraq, Jordan, Pakistan, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have all condemned this latest attack. So how would it change the trajectory of Israel's relations with regional players?
The regional players will be panicked somewhat, because if there is a conflict between Hezbollah and Israel at a full-scale level, then that has massive security implications for them. They don't want this any more than the United States and European powers as well. There's really nothing to be gained from it, but they see the dangers. They know the risks. For example, countries like Jordan are extremely vulnerable in such a situation as to what they do. Do they maintain their relations with Israel? Those who have treaties, agreements with Israel will be under internal pressure to sever those, to suspend them, and not to do business with Israel at all. So all of this is putting them in a very uncomfortable position. And they also, of course, they want to have good relations with the United States, but going to find that increasingly tough because the United States is still arming Israel. You can't call for Israeli restraint at the same time as sending them weapons. That's clearly a ridiculous position to be in. So the world has to wake up. We have to put the right pressure on these countries to stop it and to de-escalate, and also then, of course, to work for that long-term, future that actually doesn't get us back into this sort of situation. Because right now we are on the cliff edge of something even far worse than what we've already seen and are seeing in Gaza.
So, Tamer, do these attacks actually signal a potential shift in the region?
Aisha, we are in an uncharted territory, to be honest now. Everything is possible. Of course, they have crossed the red line, as Chris has said, attacking an embassy. That's unprecedented international law. It's a vulgar attack, to put it in this way, that goes against all norms. The consequences, Iran now is squeezed in a corner. Let's remind your viewers, with the start of the 7th of October events, even Iran itself distanced itself from the 7th of October attacks, and they said they have no knowledge of it, and which is, I think it's true. But the thing is, they still have a position on supporting resistance, like Palestinian resistance against occupation, and that's a different take. So now, by opening or going for a full-fledged war, with the possibility of a full-fledged war with Hezbollah backed by Iran, this is like opening Pandora's box. And again, it really depends on the Iranian reaction.
Yes,
we have different scenarios. They could again just continue the same way they have continued, by keeping the right to hit back at any place, and the timing and a restrained reaction.
Yes.
Or things could explode and go into a snowball that drags the entire region into a conflict.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.